Of course, we just made a long video on a hypothetical situation of moving to UK. So you can imagine how much detail we usually need and want to do anything, especially something like moving to a new country. Hi everyone, I'm the Rum.
And I'm the Wine.
We're an expat couple living here in Dublin, Ireland for the past almost 4 years now. It's like, wow, time's really moving. But what we do is that we make videos of what it's like moving to Ireland, more specifically Dublin, since that's, where we're based and located, but also what it takes to come here and also what to do after you come here to thrive, integrate and, be good little expats.
So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure to subscribe and also check out our past videos.
So on today's video, we're happy to announce that we have finished our course, so links in the description below.
A special discount just for subscribers.
Yes, because we love you all. But we aren't just going to throw that at you. We decided, okay, so we've made this course, we had a framework, let's actually test how it could be applied, not just to Ireland, because that's what it's about, becoming an expat in Ireland, but we're thinking, we sometimes get questions about moving to the UK, because, people somehow still have the association that Republic of Ireland is the UK. I wonder why.
Belfast in particular, we get a lot about questions about moving to Belfast, and we're like, we actually don't know because that's the UK, like.
Yeah, so for today's little experiment case study, we're going to go through the categories that we have in our course and try to apply them to how we would think we would go through the process of trying to, move to the UK. So let's get started. So one of the first things we would look for is if we would need visas in order to go to this new country, in this case the UK.
And also what it takes to be eligible to work there. So a little disclaimer up front, in a long time ago by now, in the past when we were studying in the UK, we did think about staying there for longer and applying for jobs, but at that time they were kind of changing the immigration rules like every few months, and then of course Brexit happened and
they're still changing them.
And they're still not quite sure,
like
so it's a bit tricky to use the UK as an example right now. But basically what we would look at is look at the different types of visas. So usually the different types of work permits, so sometimes they're based on a certain salary level, sometimes they're based on a certain type of education, sometimes it's like if you do a degree in that country you can then automatically have a work permit to gain work experience there if that's what you're looking for. So that's where we would start off with trying to understand what kind of jobs we could get a work permit for, or what kind of skills, education or other requirements we would have to have in order to gain a work permit. So the next step, once you've figured out sort of the criteria for the job, would also be just like, where do you even find a job like that?
And of course, naturally, you'd think you'd go into job sites or something like that. But the thing is that for bigger countries like the UK or, not really Austria, but I'll stick with the UK example.
Yeah, UK definitely quite a bit bigger than Austria.
Yeah. Well, basically, you might be thinking of a job in London, but there are some job boards that are specifically London-based. What if you were trying to get a job in the Midlands or Edinburgh? Then the job sites that you may look at would have different variety. For example, if I was looking for a job in Edinburgh, some job sites might cover the entire UK, some would only cover Pacific areas. I'd try and go as deep in Pacific as I could, but also, depending on the type of job I want. If you're looking for an engineer job, there's going to be a difference that we'll talk about later between getting that job in, say for example, London versus, Belfast or Edinburgh, or even somewhere like Manchester. So that's what we'll start off. There's definitely looking for the jobs, different sites, depending also on where we are, even the type of jobs based on the area. So we'd have a broad range of the jobs we can get, then we'll filter that down into the actual area that we would think about moving to.
So while we're looking at the different job ads, another thing we'd look at is if there's certain specific things that they ask for. So oftentimes you might have certain standard certifications that they ask for, or you might find that for whatever reason in the UK this or that programming language is much more popular and in demand than in the country you're living in, or just generally certain tools that are used because that's just the market leader in that country, certain types of software that is good to be familiar with.
So we've hopefully now kind of narrowed down a place that we can get jobs that we're comfortable with. And so we're thinking about a location. Once you find that, it moves on to this most wondrous of things to do in some countries that's a bit harder than others, accommodation.
So if you've ever lived in London or looked at living in London or even looked at living in Dublin, you know the pain of trying to find affordable accommodation that's not a broom cupboard. So of course if you're looking in London it's going to be really competitive, so it's important to know what type of accommodation is there, what areas are there, and eventually, kind of like in Dublin, you're probably faced with the situation that I guess you'll also face in many other cities of the world is, do you want to live a lot more central and closer to your workplace, but in return for the compromise have to potentially share or live in a really small place or spend a lot on rent? Or would you prefer to live further out? And then you also have to deal with the transport challenges that might come with that. And with London, the transport challenge that we looked at when we were thinking about moving there a long time ago was, it's expensive, like real expensive. The further you move out, the lot more it becomes expensive. So you have to find the right balance and the right trade-off. Do you want to live in a city, let's say you're not thinking about moving to London, let's say it's another city somewhere else in the country, like let's say Belfast, and you're like, but you really want to save on rent, you could think about moving further out, but then you always have to also consider the transport.
Of course, depending on what you're moving to the UK for, there are probably other things that you would need, like documents. For example, if I was a student, had to jump through a lot more hoops, not being an EU citizen. So if you're looking for a flat and something like that, there are a lot of other documents that you have to bring, proof that you're going to university. So there may be some other things like that. So very important is also making sure that you know the documentation that you need to move with and present once you're trying to find a flat in whatever, city, or they don't call them counties. What do they call them? I've been in Ireland for too long.
Counties?
I can't remember. Well, I know London's boroughs, so yeah.
One of those places, anyway. So the next point is, if you have subscribed to this channel, probably already know, our favourite topic to talk about, finances. Because moving country is, depending on where you're moving, quite possibly expensive.
Oh, it's always expensive.
And if you're, let's say, you're moving to the UK, and if your home currency is weaker than the pound, like we both experienced when we moved there, it's even more painful to try and come up with how much it actually costs.
Yes, so this is where the search for the job and the location all comes in pretty important, because just to move there, you're thinking about the flight, the cost for the visa, all these sort of documentations you might need, work permit. So before you even land in the country, there's this whole set of set costs. And then you've got to add your living expenses on top of that. For example, when I was a student going to the UK, what you had to do is prove that you had enough money for the entire time you were going to be there. There wasn't any landing and thinking, oh no, I'll figure that out later. It's like, no, do you have enough money? How can you prove that you can live here? Where's your proof? So hopefully it's not as bad as that still, but you need to be ready to have the money that can support you. Know that according to your plan, you don't land in the country and be like, womp womp, I might have made a mistake here. I can't go buy that thing. Or several things.
Yeah. It's also, speaking on buying things, or maybe buying the things you'd want to buy when it comes to decorating your flat and buying all the things you need. One thing you realise very quickly as a student in London, when you're pretty much essentially broke because you don't have a job, stuff is really expensive. Like, even getting a sandwich at a train station or a supermarket or whatever, stuff is expensive. So I think that's like maybe one of the most important things to look at before you really decide to move to a place, is trying to understand, can I live the life I envision in that place with the salary I'm going to make? Because if you're going there on an entry-level salary, like we were looking at as fresh university graduates, it's tough. Like, we were trying to do the numbers and calculate like where could we live, and all transport, rent, food, and we couldn't even cover the basics on the entry-level jobs that at least I was looking at with zero pretty much work experience.
I was not looking at entry-level jobs, but still, it would have been tough. It would have been tough unless you really were able to get into, a nice mid-range thing, especially to support two people.
So that of course changes if you're looking outside of London, because I know on this channel we kind of get stuck on talking a lot about the capitals, talk about Dublin, talk about Vienna, talking about London a lot because that's where we lived. But that could of course be quite different if you're in a much smaller town, even like a big town, if you're from the countryside like me, like Edinburgh. To other people it might not be a big town, to me it's a big town. The costs might look entirely different. Like of course for Scotland, Edinburgh is still quite expensive and there are cheaper cities than that in Scotland, but it's good to understand the different scale of how expensive something is and if it's worth you to live in the city, or if you'd be maybe happy living in a different city that's kind of similar but a lot cheaper.
Yes, and another point that I was supposed to come back to is back to the engineering job. The salaries, if you're looking at salaries, for a job in London would be, you'd receive more money than if you'd be working in Edinburgh, for example. So these sort of changes, are really important to look at depending on which part of a country, especially a large country, that you're moving to.
So let's say we've picked a town, we've found like accommodation we like and a job. We're pretty much set and ready to go, we've got our money saved up. The next thing we would look at is what do we actually need to hit the ground running.
Yes, it's very important in those first few weeks that we've covered in YouTube videos and of course the course to know what documents you would need. Of course, lots of people that would first of all think about money. Can I transfer money from home? I remember as a student, I couldn't just go, hi, I'd like to open a bank account. Oh no, there were different documents I would need from the school in that case. So maybe your job might require you a document. Don't know, but these are some of the things that we would look at, as well as if you're living. I know there was the situation of, I think I never heard of before, that you were paying since you were in non-student accommodation.
Oh no, I wasn't paying council tax. Because the council tax, I looked it up because I was considering staying longer in the flat after not being a student, and it was almost the same amount as the rent, because council tax can get really crazy expensive in the UK. So that is definitely something to consider, because that's a financial challenge that would have never occurred to us, because that's not something that exists in other countries we've lived in. And it's really good to get into the nitty-gritty details and read up what other people's experiences are, to make sure you're prepared for that kind of thing, so you don't suddenly get hit with a huge additional rent almost to pay that you weren't expecting to be paying.
Of course, once we're done all of that, you've moved in, you've done these first things you have to do in the first few weeks, but you still have to talk to people, you still have to integrate, you still need to live here, and that is an interesting challenge in itself. Yeah, I'll let Julia take over telling you her interesting experience where the university tried to acclimatise her to what it would be like to live in the UK.
So, in case you haven't noticed, as an Austrian, my first language is German, so I was a little nervous about moving to an English-speaking country. Like, sure, I got a bachelor's degree in English, but still, it's like talking to real-life English-speaking people seems a lot scarier once you have to do it for like a whole year. So, what the university went to actually did is they had like a sort of cultural seminar where they teach you about all the British things. So they explain to you how to queue, how to be punctual, how to do small talk, how to talk about weather, how important tea is. It's just all these things. It's like, to be fair, having watched a lot of British TV series, I pretty much knew this stuff. I was just like, that sounds like good crack, I'll go there, just for the fun of it. But talking to a lot of the other international students there, it was very valuable to them, because there were things that they would have never occurred to them about, like certain things about how exactly you're supposed to queue, and where they were like, yeah, I've seen people do that on the street when they queue for the bus, and I was so confused by why they're just standing there, and suddenly it made sense. So if it's like a completely new culture, that can be a really valuable thing as well.
Yeah, I know stuff like this might seem obvious, but it really makes a difference depending on what culture you came from or what culture you're going into. For example, if you were moving to Korea, for example, yeah, this sort of stuff will suddenly be right on top there on the list.
So kind of leading on from that, we'd also look more at the long term and like what challenges are there. So we already mentioned council tax, which is, in case you don't know, it's basically like a tax you pay that's decided by the things like the borough, whatever neighbourhood. So it depends largely on where you decide to move and can be different in different areas close together. So it's small things like that that are so super specific to that country that can be a real challenge to figure out if you've never encountered it before. So we'd look around different, expat videos like ourselves are doing and just try and figure out what are challenges to prepare for and how can we prepare for them so we don't get like stuck in the first month and are already like, no, this is horrible, we want to go home immediately, let's book the next flight. So just to prepare for that and also to think about the long term, how to thrive, like what are ways to move forward in our careers, to be happy in our personal lives, to make friends, and just to, in the long term, live what is to us a good life and a happy life in the place that we're moving to.
Yeah, so these exact topics, kind of the same general feel, we've covered in our course for moving to Ireland. Yes, we are continuing to work on it and expand it out. Of course, as I said before, links in the description. If you are still thinking about moving to Ireland, probably not this year because of situations.
But you never know.
Yes, but you never know. We're currently in the a little tiny update. We're starting to accelerate, open back up, just like most of Europe. So things are linking up. So
and also based on a lot of messages that we get, a lot of you guys are actually starting to research 6 months or something ahead of when you're actually planning to move, or maybe once your new job would start. And I think if you're still that far away in your timeline, looking back at our own experience, that's why we would have liked to have the course, because we're people who like to prepare and know everything and plan before going into the situation, so you're already comfortable with all the information, all the terms, all the acronyms that are so Ireland specific, to really have an easy, smooth, what is the word? I can never remember. A soft landing.
Of course, we just made a long video on a hypothetical situation of moving to UK. So you can imagine how much detail we usually need and want to do anything, especially something like moving to a new country. Out of that, before we talk your ear off even more, we'll sign out. Please be sure to subscribe, check out the course, and we'll see you in our next video, which is kind of an interesting topic about what it might be like to be an expat for the rest of 2020. Yeah, I'll be honest, it's kind of a challenge. There are new things we're going to need to learn, so we'll address those in the next video. See you later. Bis später.